terms of impacts, let's look at that. And that can also be tied to the issue of monitoring how much or how well we've been able to carry out certain projects. If, for instance, a ministry says we've done this, who goes to check? How do we monitor the execution of these projects, the implementation of certain amounts of money that have been released to some agencies or ministry? How do we go about it, or how well have we been doing that, the monitoring and evaluation of budget implementation?
Well, I think that really, if you can implement the budget and implement it effectively, if the budget has been well conceptualized, it should be impactful. Of course, we know that in our system you have leakages and so on and so forth. But when we talk of monitoring, that's what the National Assembly, when they talk about their oversight, that's essentially what they do. And so they spend a whole lot of time. They go to visit agencies and ministries and so on and so forth. They oversight to see to what extent has the budget been implemented. And that's why you find that over the period, you find that the executive is saying we attain this level of implementation. The Assembly comes and says we attain that level of implementation. And so there are issues, in terms of making sure that even the money you budgeted for, even when that money is spent, because look at the constituency projects. And what we hear, again, sometimes what you hear, you don't know to what extent how factual it is. That the members of the National Assembly, this constituency project, sometimes would nominate those who would have to execute these projects. And so when you have that happening, although of course this says that the ministries implement, they have to nominate, then there's the potential of conflicts of interest coming up. And so one should not be surprised that really, like he is saying, so maybe when that money is spent, and supposedly spent, it's not impactful.
So nobody really tells us how much or how well certain amounts of money have been spent by the various ministries and agencies involved.
I would expect that the budget office should know, because they disburse the money. Ideally, they should have the facts.
Okay. I just want to I'm going to get to budget right now, because I want us to look at some of the figures we got from the Ministry of Finance. And of course, they said that out of the 1.62 trillion naira earmarked for capital expenditure in 2013, 1.01 trillion naira has so far been released, and 598.4 billion naira has been utilized. What's your take on this various numbers we've gotten?
There are three things you mentioned. The first is the release of funds. The second is the use of funds. And the third is the impact of the funds that have been released. The release of funds and the use of funds over many years isn't creating the required impact on the economy. And why the main reason why it's not creating the required impact is the funds are not released on time, and the funds that are released are insufficient. So what you will find out is, for many years, though the budget seems to be growing, we also have an issue with population. So the budget is growing on one hand, but population is also growing. If we get to a point where the budget, like it is proposed for next year, is lower than this year's budget, what it simply means is, on an aggregate basis, the amount of money that is available to be spent per capita has reduced. You have a reducing budget, you have population increasing.
I think that's why we have this medium-term expenditure framework, which doesn't just capture a year's budget, like the Ministry of Finance is trying to tell us, but a few years, perhaps 3 years framework. Shouldn't we also put into perspective the fact that we'll be having growing populations, and also factor that into our budgeting process?
Which is exactly the point we're making. The 3 to 5 year framework has to clearly not just be a document of assumptions. We have to be able to look at the assumptions. We have to be able to look at our budget and look at the standard of living of Nigerians on the streets. We have to be able to look at our budget and look at their welfare. We have to be able to look at our budget and look at what other economies are budgeting. As long as we keep our budgeting process and our benchmarking process to oil and to what we currently do, without considering what the budget should be and how much we need to be making to be able to get to the standard of living that we desire and that we truly need, we will always have this discussion.
Okay, just before you want to have a comment?
Well, I was going to say that for me, really, yes, I mean, he has a point in terms of saying that the population is important. But I think that really for me it's sophistry, because let's implement the budget. Let's have growth in the economy. And obviously, population would increase. There's no two way about it. Like, nominally, we grow at about 3% per year, and that's why we're now almost, is it 170, 160 population, which will increase. But for as long as you have productivity within the economy, you have your GDP, and it's growing. GDP, from what we've gotten, has grown about 7 on average %. That's about the highest growth rate within the sub region. Okay, so if you are growing well, and I think that yes, there are many issues to worry about, issues of releases and utilization. There are delays, due process, and so on and so forth. But I think that really, for me, the crux of the matter is that we have structural impediments in budget preparation and implementation. I mean, I share his point. It is about the size of the budget and so on and so. It would matter in due course. But let's build up the capacity. Let's have institutions, beyond individuals, that will help us going forward be able to manage ourselves appropriately.
Okay, going forward, just before I let you go, how can we achieve the proper budget implementation, Babajide?
A bottom-up budget preparation process is essential, whereby the budget doesn't come from the federal government, it comes from the ministries, departments, and agencies, which is very important. It is also important that we tie our budgets to our short to long-term goals, rather than have a medium-term framework that focuses on assumptions. We need to clearly have detailed commentary on all our budgeting decisions. For the focus in future should be on non-oil revenue. On oil revenue, there's a cap to what you can achieve. Based on OPEC quota, there's some limits we can't go above. We also clearly can't determine global oil prices. There are many factors that contribute to that. So the oil revenue part really can't grow beyond a certain quota. Where the opportunities lie are non-oil revenue sources. Tax enforcement, not necessarily increasing the tax rates, but ensuring that we block all the leakages, okay, like he had said.
Right.
And we also tie our non-oil revenue projections to faster growth rates. As it is today, looking at the medium-term economic framework, non-oil revenue budget growth is roughly about 8% per annum. Okay. What we should be focusing on is looking at how we can grow our non-oil revenue exponentially.
All right, I think that's how much you can take on the program. Thank you for your thoughts. We appreciate them. And we'll be talking to Dr. Boniface Chizia and also Babajide Ogunsowo. Thank you very much for your time with us on the program. And that's where we'll wrap it up on the program for the midweek edition. We appreciate your time with us on the program. I am Bolaji Akinwale. News Track is coming up next.